It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Emil Rem. Hi, Emil. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you
here.
Well,
thank you for the privilege.
So I was reading through your bio. Very interesting life you've had so far. Rather than me just read it, why don't you give us a little recap in your own words? Start from when you were a kid and all of the sort of crazy things that happened, and then bring us up to now, and then we'll pivot over to your books.
Okay. Well, I was born in Dar-es-Salam, Tanzania, East Africa, in 1955. It was a very small. I was born into Muslim parents, specifically the Ismailis under the Aga Khan. It was a very close-knit community, very loving, very caring. And my mum was extremely ambitious. She got married at the age of 23. It was all physical attraction for my dad. He was a great character, but had absolutely no sense of duty or obligations. And they had me, and my mum decided that he was a bum, and she had to do something better with her life. She divorced him, which was absolutely unheard of at that time in that community, and she was ostracized. So she decided that she was going to go, and the only place that she could get any kind of work was in England. So she went off to England because we were a protectorate of the UK. And she decided she was going to take me. Now, she had no education. She could hardly speak English. The only job she could get was studying to be a nurse. And she wasn't paid very much, but she was given food and accommodation. Unfortunately, she decided to take me, but there was nobody there. She couldn't look after me because the nursing guys wouldn't allow her to do so. She found a middle-class English family who would take me on. I'm on a plane on my own, coming from Africa at the age of 5 to England, and the family calls my mum and tells her that they've changed their minds. She's crying in hospital, and a patient asks why. She explains. She says, I'm here for appendicitis. I'm going to be here for at least a week. Here's a chit. Take your son from the airport to my mum. She's looking after my 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and they're the same age as your son, give or take. And she'll look after them for a week or two until you find somebody. But that 2 weeks turned into 12 years before my Indian mother decided to take me out from that family that I love so much. So I end up in this family who've got no clue, and they're in a working class low housing estate. Now, I've been in the middle class in Africa where you have servants do all your work. You take 3 or 4 hours every day for lunch. The world is your oyster. Now, all of a sudden, I'm going into a family that asked me, seriously, if Tarzan was my neighbor. They knew nothing of Africa, but they took me on. And they took me on as part of their family. I was never, ever looked at as anything else. They had no money. They had 6 kids. There's no business in the world to have taken me on. And they received nothing from my mum because mum was hardly given pocket money to live on. And that's how I started my life in England. And I stayed with them for 12 years. And then my blooming mum from her community was told that, actually her brother, if you leave your son with the family, he's going to turn Christian. So, you should get him out of there as fast as you can. Now, my father remained in Africa, and he worked for the airline, so he would send me free tickets. From the age of 5, I was used to traveling every holiday from England to Africa, so I led double lives. But the airline I flew on was East African Airways. All our friends and all our community were either running the airlines, and there were stewardesses or pilots or whatever. So to me, I would get a standby ticket, take a B bus from Maidenhead, which is about 30 miles from London, get to the airport, get a plane that nobody knew whether I was coming or not because it was all standby. And from the moment I got on the plane, I knew somebody as far as the crew were concerned. I'd get into Dar-es-Salam, Tanzania. I'd know the taxi driver there. Or my uncle was managing the airport. And they would just put me on a car and just take me home. And I'd wait for my dad to come home for his siesta from work. And that was my life. And then as I grew older, I think from the age of 12, he would send me wads of tickets from all the airlines in the world. I would go to Heathrow. I have a little carrier bag full of clothes for 3 or 4 days. And I would just show them the wad of tickets. Whichever one I was able to get on at that time, I got on. I could be in Mexico one day. I could be in Moscow the next. And that's how I lived my life. Every holiday I had, I traveled everywhere. But on the one side, we were given all these tickets. On the other, both my father and my mother were totally broke. So, I mean, in terms of having money to travel in, right?
Let me interrupt you here. I just wanted to ask a question. So, when you had all of these tickets and you said you could be in Mexico or anywhere, you were how old?
I began these travels at the age of 12 and continued traveling for another, until I was in high school, which was 1973.
And
so I would have traveled from 67 all the way to 73, even up to 78.
So you could get on an international flight as a minor alone and get off and go into these countries without anybody asking a question?
Absolutely. And you know what? Here's my thing. The reason why I feel comfortable around any kind of person, wherever they are, I would talk to the people on the plane. And if I was able to make a connection, they would invite me home to stay with them. And they were absolutely generous. They would take me to all these places. Now, I ended up one day in Los Angeles, and I had this East Indian student who was on the plane with me. Well, he took me to his apartment. He took me to Disneyland. He introduced me to a Danish smorgasbord. Can you imagine a smorgasbord lunch in Los Angeles? And I didn't have any money. I mean, the guy paid for everything. So I've been brought up to be brought up that there is so much generosity and love in people. All you've got to be able to do is to be able to tap the right vein in somebody. But if you approach those people as though you're suspicious they're going to harm you, you know what? Harm will come to you. Perhaps I'm naive, I don't know. But I tell you, I've had strangers do more for me, like my English family, than my own Indian family.
Well,
and then the other part. Go ahead.
It's interesting to me because I don't think you could get away with that now. I think it was a different time back in the 60s because you would get stopped at immigration and customs, and they'd want to know everything. You know.
Absolutely, they didn't do that then. And and the other part of it was that if I couldn't find anybody, I had to sleep on the airport floor, walk to downtown, and come back in the evening and sleep. Nobody ever questioned it or anything. The only time I was ever stopped was I was traveling to Bangkok, and about 2 or 3 in the morning, it was just supposed to be an overnight flight. They took every one of us out of the plane. They said, "Sorry, there's been a coup, and the plane is not allowed to leave. There's no planes allowed to leave out of the airport." Now, I found an old sofa on a balcony. All the stuffing had come out. They got springs hanging out of it, and this is what I slept in. I was sleeping there, but I couldn't sleep because you had mosquitoes every minute. You had hundreds of mosquitoes all over me. A soldier comes up to me. And he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I was asked to leave the plane. I've got nowhere to go." He says, "Come with me." Oh, my God. So I come with him. I have no choice. He takes me to his home. And he said, "You stay here with me." And he took me everywhere. Now, I only had very little money. And my next stop was going towards Australia. And he says to me, "Can you get me a koala bear, like a stuffed one, from Australia, and I'll pay you the money for it. I said, sure. I get the thing, come back to him. He takes it. He gives me a whole bunch of money, which is more than what the koala bear was. And I use that now to get onto the next stop of my journey, and hopefully by then the coup had stopped. But one of the most interesting things was he opens the fridge, and he says, and there's a drink in a container. So I'm thinking to myself, it's dark and it's black. He said, would you like some? I said, sure. I thought it was Coca-Cola. So he gives me this cold drink. I'm just taking a whole sip of it. It's not even a sip, a whole gulp of it. And I suddenly choke. It wasn't Coca-Cola. It was iced coffee. Now, coffee in England, under my English family, was a huge luxury. Nobody drank coffee at that time. So I didn't know what it was and what it wasn't. But, these are the remarkable things that happen along the way.
Well, it's interesting.
So now that's go ahead. So that's one side of it. My mother decided that she was going to prove to everybody in Africa that she was going to be a success. So her success meant she was going to be a multimillionaire. And she became a multimillionaire by working 3 or 4 jobs at a time, all at cheap, keeping all the money, buying a little condo, selling the condo, turning it into buying a house, and it went on and on and on until she made millions. But she was highly domineering. And so everything in the house, I had to do her way. Well, there's only 2 ways I could go. I could either, at the age of 12, she brought me home with her. She couldn't look after me, but she gave me so much money that I had more money than I think all the people in my class had together. So I would go from Maidenhead. I would go to all the theatres in London, see all the plays and theatres. I go to all the best restaurants that I could. I had a whale of a time, but I had no mum. With my working class family, the school was 15 minutes away by walk. I'd get home at a certain time. The meal would be freshly made at home because my English mum didn't go to work. And it would all be there. It would all be wholesome. We'd eat our food. I'd spend time with my English mum playing cards, gin rummy. And in the meantime, it loosened me to be able to talk to her about the day. So you're just sitting there and say, how was your day? We played cards. And inevitably, I'd talk about this happened at school, that happened in the school. We built such a rapport. When I went to my mum, one of her other things was that she wanted me to go to Oxford and Cambridge to prove to people back home in Africa who didn't really care that, she was a success. Well, to do that, I had to leave the school that I loved so much, and I had to go to another school, which was in another little town from where we lived. It took me 2 to 3 buses to get there, and I had to do it all on my own. Oh, well, I did my traveling on my own on the airlines, of course, but on a bus like that. And then I'd come home, there'd be nobody there. I'd stop over in Maidenhead, which is the town, and she lived on the outskirts of it. And I'd go to a lovely Italian restaurant where there was a family that cooked food, and I was part of that family, and I'd eat there. And that still comes to me in Calgary. Every restaurant I choose for myself, and I'm lucky to be able to go to restaurants, are all family-run. They're passionate about their food. They bring me in as their family. So all of those things that happened to me as a youngster come out even now, and it's passed on to my kids as to the kind of restaurants they should eat or the people that they should meet. So anyway, she did all of this, and she was always pushing and bullying me into doing things, which I really didn't want to do. But then she said, okay, in order to be able to get to university, you have to go to a grammar school. Grammar schools were done so that they would groom you for university. Well, of course, I failed all my exams at school. So now the question was, she said to me, I have a friend of mine who's an accountant. He'll take you in. And if you don't do that, I'm going to send you back to school to take your exams again. Well, I went to the accounting firm, and it was a total disaster. I signed the papers in June when my school ended, and I was going to work in January. For 6 months, I traveled around the world. One of the areas I went to was Lebanon, and I was going to go from Lebanon. I was going to go to Damascus by plane. From Damascus, eventually, I was going to go to Baghdad. Baghdad at that time was friendly with Iran. I was going to go over to Tehran. Never happened, because the day I landed was Yom Kippur in 1973. There was bombings everywhere. Soldier comes up to me again and says, what are you doing here? You can't stay at the airport. I say, I have no money. He takes me into a pension that's run by Roman Catholics for people who've got no money. And I stayed there for 5 or 6 days. I've got all this bombing coming in because they were bombing the cables off the waterway the Israelis were. And I eventually ended up, a family felt sorry for me. They took a taxi with 6 people there. I don't know how they fitted in. And they took me with them. And we were able to go up into Syria, and then Syria to Baghdad, Abadan, and then take buses and everything from the coast of Iran all the way through to Tehran. And then I could catch my usual planes and routings and so on. So I do all of that. I come into an accounting firm where everything is regimented. You come in at a certain time, you have your lunch at a certain time, you put it in an old house, and you're in an attic, you're given a suitcase full of invoices. You have to write all of the invoices down on a piece of paper and all the bank transactions down, and you give it to the partner who finishes off the financial statements.
Okay.
So I had all kinds of problems everywhere I went, because all my life I was being programmed into doing things I didn't like and trying to fit into other people's lives rather than lead my own.
We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I've got to push this over to the book. Okay.
Sure.
So your book, the latest book, is called The Vanishing Gardens of Cordova, and then you've got two others on here. I see Heart of New York and Chasing Aphrodite. Are all of these books sort of part of your adventures of life, or are they fictions, or can you give us about 1 minute, because we really got to cut it off?
Absolutely. They're all about my travels. Each chapter is really a short story on its own. If you read the whole book, you get the full story. And it's all our travels I used to do with my kids. Over summer, we go to different places, and they were part of me. And so these are our experiences in all different places all over the world. I look at eccentrics in those places and compare them to the eccentrics in my past life.
Okay.
And that's what the story is about. And the parables of being able to look at something and seeing somebody else's point of view in there.
Okay. Is The Vanishing Gardens, is that the latest one?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And has it been released?
It's been released. It was out in December last year.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to cut it off here, but we are out of time. Last question, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yep. It's Emil Rem, EMIL Rem, REM .ca.
.ca. Okay. All right, great.
Appreciate that, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, and
you're more than welcome.
Interesting stories. Best of luck with your books. I hope they do well.
Thank you, and the best of luck to you on your program as well. Thank you.